Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to our daily Hindu analysis. Now, before we begin today's analysis of today's newspaper, don't forget immediately after the session ends, we shall have a quiz on our Telegram channel. So do subscribe to our Telegram channel by using the link given in the description and take the quiz so you can revise these topics and prepare comprehensively for the upcoming prelims. Before we start, why don't you support these initiatives by hitting that like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So let's start by looking at the topics we are going to discuss today. Today we have a set of important topics that are lined up. There are 4 important articles I have chosen. One of them is an editorial and we have 3 columns as well. The first article deals with a new set of amendments that has been proposed to the IT rules by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Through these amendments, the government is looking to deal with fake news, the problem of fake news, particularly on social media platforms. So in this regard, the government is looking to provide fact-checking powers to the PIB or the Press Information Bureau. And the PIB is being proposed as a nodal authority to check for facts on social media. So this has triggered a lot of controversy and we need to examine this topic in complete detail. Next, we shall talk about the POCSO Act, the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. It's been 10 years of the POCSO Act and hence it's very, very important to evaluate the provisions of the Act and also critically analyze this important legislation. Next, we shall take a look at the ASER report that deals with the education status in India. We shall examine this column in detail as well. And finally, we'll take a column related to international relations, which helps us understand the ongoing geopolitical conflict between India and China in Sri Lanka. We'll look at the situation in Sri Lanka and how there is a competition between India and China in Sri Lanka. So these are the important topics that we have for today. So let's quickly start with the first article. This editorial, as I mentioned, it deals with the proposed amendment to the IT rules. The IT rules under the IT Act of 2000 provides for regulation of social media, digital media platforms and OTT platforms. The new set of IT rules was brought out in the year 2021. And now the government has proposed a set of amendments to these IT rules in order to tackle the menace of fake news, which has become a serious concern as a result of misuse of social media platforms. So this topic is very, very relevant for polity and also for internal security. Because in internal security, we have a dedicated topic which deals with the misuse of communication networks, social media platforms to create security challenges. India itself has been a victim of the misuse of social media where fake news is widely prevalent. So in this context, we need to understand how social media platforms are misused, what is the challenge created by fake news, how the government is trying to deal with it, and what are the regulatory guidelines that have been proposed. The Ministry of Electronics and IT is seeking to amend the IT rules and it has uploaded the draft IT rules, which will authorize the Press Information Bureau, the PIB, to deal with fake news by checking the facts and by ordering such content to be taken down by social media platforms. As you know, PIB or Press Information Bureau functions as the communication arm of the Government of India. I'm sure civil service aspirants would be referring to PIB articles frequently. You would get a lot of updates from various government ministries as well. So this communication arm of the government is being proposed as the nodal authority to deal with fake news, to check for facts on social media and order the taking down of content which is promoting fake news. So this is where I would like to have a detailed discussion on the misuse of social media. From a mains point of view, it's a very, very important topic. Not just for GS paper 3 and paper 2, even for your essay paper. There could be an entire essay topic related to the misuse of social media. As you know, social media platforms have created tremendous opportunities. It has changed the very face of the global economy. It has generated millions of job opportunities It has changed the way we communicate. It has changed the way governments function and the way businesses function. So without doubt, social media has had a revolutionary impact. But however, this is the positive side of social media. There is a dark side to the social media because social media platforms have become very vulnerable for misuse and abuse. It has become the right platform for spreading propaganda, for spreading fake news, for spreading misinformation, for carrying out social engineering, through which vested interests can manipulate societies. It is a well-established fact that social media has been amplifying all forms of harmful content, particularly fake news and false information. This is primarily because social media is unique when compared to traditional forms of media. When you think of traditional media, you think of print media, radio, television, etc. Even in traditional media, there was scope for misuse. Even in newspapers, even in radio, television, fake news could be spread. But however, the difference with new forms of media, that is social media, is that they have a tremendous reach. On social media, different formats of content can be carried. It can carry audio, video, print, text, everything. Whereas in traditional media, there was a limitation on the format. Right? Radio would be limited to audio messages. Print would be limited to images and text. But social media is truly convergent. It converges all forms of media, all forms of format, and brings together news and entertainment. And more importantly, on social media, anybody can become a creator. Anybody can become a publisher. Whereas in traditional media, it was only few organizations which would control the media outlets. But on social media, anybody with a mobile phone with a basic internet connection can become a content creator, can start spreading news and their opinions, which gets a lot of traction as well from their followers, and this could have a wide impact. It basically amplifies your reach. It gives you instantaneous reach, and what you post on social media, if it goes viral, you will almost have a global reach. So this happens to be a very, very serious concern. The very strength of social media becomes its weakness. This power of social media, if it is in the right hands, it can be used for carrying out an economic disruption. It helps small businesses. It gives a voice to the lower sections. It truly democratizes information. But the same power in the wrong hands could be misused to ensure that there are very, very dangerous and serious consequences. For example, a hostile government, a hostile intelligence agency, or a terrorist group, a radical group, right-wing extremist groups, they are known to misuse social media platforms for large-scale propaganda against their respective targets. It's quite easy to indoctrinate people, brainwash people, and carry out social engineering and push them to alter their opinion, push them to change their choices. And as a result, social media has become very, very prone to misuse. It has led to real-world security problems. Through misuse of social media, it is possible to bring down governments, disrupt democratic elections, instigate riots, create communal polarization. Studies also show that on social media, far right-wing extremism in particular has become more prevalent. So in this context, it becomes very important to regulate some of the content on social media. Because as I was mentioning, on social media, you have different forms of falsehood which is being spread. There is misinformation which is being carried. Misinformation is basically any misleading information, an image or a video which has been taken slightly out of context and the viewer perceives it in a different way. They take it out of context and get misled. They start believing that what they're watching is true, what they're reading is true. This is largely unintentional. So unintentional misleading is misinformation. But disinformation is much more dangerous because disinformation is targeted. It is deliberate. There is an intent to spread the wrong message. The one who is creating this message, the origin or the originator of the message, is intentionally creating this, deliberately creating false content, taking visuals or pictures out of context, photoshopping them or manipulating them, and ensuring that the wrong information is being spread in the social media platform. For example, with the emergence of artificial intelligence, today you have deep fake technology Through deep fakes, you can generate very realistic, hyper-realistic images and visuals. And it's quite easy to carry out disinformation by using artificial intelligence. But the worst form of falsehood on social media is malinformation. Because malinformation is designed to harm and to promote divisions. It is designed to target certain individuals. It is designed to target organizations. The intention here is to defame, to bring a bad name, to harm someone's dignity, to harass people, and even promote hate speech against minorities and weaker sections. So falsehood can exist in different forms. It can be misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. But all of them can be equally dangerous, as it could lead to real-world consequences. That is why around the world, there is a general distrust of social media and media platforms. This is not just a problem affecting India. Many surveys, many studies have shown that around the world, trust in media and social media is very low. I've taken this graph from a well-established research which captures the public sentiment and the public trust in media outlets and social media. Around the world, even in developed countries like UK, Australia, Canada, you can see that the trust in traditional media is pretty low. Around 50% people trust traditional media sources. This in itself is pretty low. But trust in social media is even lower. It falls to less than 30% in most countries. So this is a clear indication that social media has become a hub for easy spread of fake news and propaganda. That is the reason why the government of India also has been taking steps to regulate these platforms. Just to highlight the threat, let me give you a real-world example. Let me tell you one incident that India faced back in 2012. In 2012, in the state of Assam, the Bodo insurgents, the National Democratic Front of Bodoland, which was a notorious insurgent terrorist group, it carried out communal riots at Kokrajhar, in the Kokrajhar district of Assam. There was a targeted communal violence against the native Muslims of the region led by this insurgent terrorist group. Following these communal riots, a fake message started circulating on WhatsApp. This was in 2012, when social media was just gaining popularity in India. So a fake rumor started spreading on WhatsApp, which alleged that in other parts of the country, Northeast Indians could be attacked in retaliation for the communal violence which had happened. Since Bodos had attacked, Bodo insurgents had carried out communal violence against the Muslims in Kokrajhar, a fake message was circulated, a rumor was circulated on WhatsApp that in other parts of India, Northeast Indians would be targeted. This would be retaliation for these communal riots. This, however, was a completely false message. It was a rumor, no basis. There was no basis to it. But this rumor had the potential to trigger the exodus of Northeast Indians from across Indian cities. Students and workers from Northeast India who work in various Indian cities, especially in South India, they believed this message was true. They believed that what they read was true. There would be a targeted attempt against the community, entire community itself. And they started fleeing Indian cities. There was an exodus of Northeast Indians overnight. Bus stations, airports were crowded. Fortunately, it didn't result in any major security crisis. But one mistake or one accident would have been enough to trigger widespread riots, which would have destabilized the Indian society. So this was one of India's first experiences with the misuse of social media and how it could create security problems for India. Following this, the government came out with a policy to deal with social media as well. In fact, this is what triggered UPSC as well to introduce the misuse of social media as one of the chapters under internal security, under GS paper 3. Because in 2013 was when the main syllabus was updated by UPSC. So the misuse of social media and communication networks was added as one of the chapters so that the aspirants are also aware of the threats that emanate from social media platforms. So the government of India has recently brought out a set of rules, regulatory guidelines, known as the IT Rules of 2021. It was notified in 2021 under the IT Act of India, the Information Technology Act of 2000. This is the primary law that we have to deal with information technology, to deal with any electronic commerce in the country. It also deals with cybersecurity, cyber crimes. So under the same law, IT rules of 2021 were notified to replace the 2011 rules. Through these IT rules, the government has sought to regulate the intermediaries, the social media intermediaries, who are basically hosting the content of their users, along with digital media and OTT platforms. These three entities of new age media were sought to be regulated by the government through the IT rules. One would be the intermediaries, that is the social media platforms, which includes your Facebook, Google, WhatsApp, Twitter, all of them. Second would be for digital media outlets which only have a digital presence. And the third would be for OTT platforms, over-the-top platforms, basically your streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, etc. So the government went for self-regulation and limited regulation for digital media and OTT platforms. As far as OTT platforms and digital media was concerned, the government went for very limited regulation and promoted self-regulation by the companies, by the industry itself. Because the government didn't want to meddle too much in the case of digital media and OTT platforms, which would be a violation of their artistic right and their right to free speech and expression that is guaranteed under Article 19. However, in the case of intermediaries, social media intermediaries, the government went in for a strict regulation, and I'm going to discuss some of the provisions as well. Through these IT rules, the government did recognize the problem. The government clearly pointed out that social media has many advantages, but it is being misused. So there is a need to regulate the content, there is a need to enforce certain rules which these companies are bound to follow. Because most companies didn't have a presence in India, even though they had a big subscriber base. India would be their biggest subscriber base. Most companies would be based out of US or foreign countries, and they wouldn't have an office in India. They wouldn't have any employees posted in India. So this made it difficult for the Indian government to exercise jurisdiction over these companies. Even when there is a misuse of social media taking place, if a message was leading to a crime or a security incident, and if the authorities reached out to these companies, they wouldn't cooperate. They wouldn't share information. Their technology is highly encrypted. So our agencies, our security agencies will not have access to the information. Even when court orders were given to cooperate, many of the companies would deny any cooperation with India, because they knew that they wouldn't be subjected to any legal penalties. Because India also had granted a degree of legal immunity, because these are third parties at the end of the day. So for the content that is present on their platform, they wouldn't be held directly liable. A degree of legal immunity was also granted to them. So to change this landscape, to force these companies to cooperate and have an official presence in India, these IT rules were brought out. With regard to regulating social media firms were categorized into two different groups. You have social media intermediaries, which refers to the smaller companies which have very small subscriber base. And the second category refers to significant social media intermediaries. This is the primary focus of the government. The significant social media intermediaries, which represents the large companies like Facebook, Google, and the others. So significant social media intermediaries, they have a very large subscriber base. They have a very huge presence. So they have been brought under very intense regulation of the government. Now they have been mandated to post a chief compliance officer in the country, should be a resident of India. They should have a chief compliance officer. There should be a nodal contact person available throughout the day, throughout the year, so authorities can know whom to contact, whom to issue a notice for. And they should also appoint a grievance officer who can listen to complaints, receive grievances from the users directly. When users flag a report, when they flag some content, if they say it is inappropriate, it has to be addressed. This grievance has to be redressed by the company. So there should be a grievance redressal mechanism which is looked after by a grievance officer posted in India. So these three positions were made mandatory for these companies. There should be a chief compliance officer who will submit a monthly report, a monthly compliance report. The chief compliance officer is obligated by law to submit a monthly compliance report to the government to show how the company is following these rules, how it is enforcing the law. If it is not found to be complying, then legal action can be taken against these officials. The government can even proceed to file cases against them and get them arrested and get them punished for the violations as per the provisions of the IT Act. So this makes the companies more accountable and has pushed them to have a presence in India. Along with that, these IT rules have mandated that these social media firms, they have to help trace the originator of a message. If fake news is being circulated, if harmful content is being circulated, right? It could be a message instigating communal tensions, a message promoting hate speech, a message targeting women, right? Or a content which is promoting child pornography. Any such harmful content, if it is noted on social media, then the government might seek the company. It might ask the company to help in tracing the originator of this message. This was previously not possible. Companies would say we have end-to-end encryption. Even we don't know where the message originates from. We don't monitor the messages. Because companies are interested in data privacy, in protecting the data security of their users. Or else no user will trust these companies. So on these grounds, they were claiming immunity. They would say that we don't have access to this data. The messages are end-to-end encrypted. So now the government has mandated these companies to come up with solutions, technological solutions, through which the originator of a message can be traced. This is mandatory. If a message has led to the breakdown of law in any way, and if the government approaches these companies, they have to help the government trace the originator within a specified time. Or else, again, there will be penalties on the company, and the responsible officials, the chief compliance officer and the nodal contact person could be arrested and criminal charges could be filed against them. So that immunity which existed before has been taken away, and this places the social media companies under the regulation of the IT rules. So when these rules were notified in 2021, it became quite controversial. Because see, we are talking about the necessity for the government to regulate these companies. We are looking at just one side of the argument. Look at this from the other way. What if there is an authoritarian government? What if there are elements within the government who are misusing these powers? What if the government is trying to carry out targeted surveillance on the citizens? What if the government is trying to target political dissent and criticism and opposition? There could be a journalist writing against the government. There could be an opposition leader criticizing the government. So to target them, the government could misuse its powers over social media firms, force them to reveal information. And this would be a breach of data privacy. Data privacy, please note down, is part of right to privacy. It's a fundamental right under Article 21, which is recognized by the Supreme Court under the K.S. Puttaswamy case. It was a landmark judgment. This also breaches Article 19. It would violate and erode right to free speech, right to free expression, right to free press. So these two important fundamental rights could stand violated if the government misuses these regulatory powers. That is why these IT rules have become very, very controversial as well. Is that clear? I'll repeat this point. The misuse of these powers, regulatory powers by the government, could lead to breach of data privacy of the users. That is a violation of right to privacy under Article 21. Similarly, if the government is using this to cripple or target any dissent, criticism and opposition, then that is a violation of Article 19, which is an erosion of right to free speech, right to free press. So that is why the rules have been controversial, and now the government is looking to bring in an amendment to these IT rules. It has proposed an amendment which will allow the PIB, the Press Information Bureau, to monitor fake news on social media, and if it says the content is fake, then the companies, the media outlets also will be mandated to take down this content based on the fact check that has been done by the PIB. So the editorial takes a stand over here. Now, as you know, PIB, the Press Information Bureau, it is more of a communication arm of the government. It is like the PR arm of the government, reaching out to the public, the media, and conveying government reports, government achievements, new initiatives of the government. Essentially, developments related to the government are communicated officially through the PIB. So it's the press arm, the PR, the public relations arm of the government. Now, how can such a government agency be given the powers to check facts? See, PIB is already doing this. PIB has already flagged a lot of fake content on social media. Companies have taken it down as well. But this is happening as a genuine exercise where the PIB does not have any legal powers. Now, what if through law, PIB is given these powers, it has this authority, and it tells the social media companies to take down some content because PIB believes that it is fake content. Now, how can the government itself The government alone can determine the content is fake. This is where the concern comes up. Because an arm of the government, a communication arm of the government, which actually will have a vested interest here, could misuse the authority here. It could lead to government censorship. Now tomorrow, let's say the Hindu writes a critical article criticizing a government policy, which is a democratic right. And tomorrow if PIB says that this is fake content, on Hindu website or on Facebook, Hindu has posted a article which is fake. So if PIB says it is fake, and if that becomes the law of the land, and if the platforms are forced to take down that article, that is essentially censorship. It is a direct breach of Article 19, a breach of right to free speech and expression. So this is the real concern with the proposed amendment. It is good that the government is making attempts to regulate social media, to deal with fake news and harmful content. But the way in which it is being done is being questioned, right? So this is the other argument where the government has been questioned on these grounds. How can a government agency like PIB alone be given these powers to decide what is factual, what is not factual? How can PIB alone tell this is fake? If such discretionary powers are given to PIB, chances are high that it could target those articles, such content which is critical of the government, which is critical of the ruling party and the government leaders. So if such content is taken down, and if companies are forced to do that by law, then that is violation of Article 19. So that is why the proposed amendment has been criticized, and the Editors Guild of India also has taken a stand. The Editors Guild of India, it's a collective of all the editors and publishers in the country. So they have taken a stand, criticized these proposed amendments, and they have asked the government to take a relook at these proposed amendments. So that is why the topic is very, very important. Now let's move to the second column. Let's look at the next article, which evaluates the POCSO Act, the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. Now this law is in news because it marks the 10th anniversary of this law. It was in 2012 that this important piece of legislation was introduced by the Government of India. It was enacted by the Parliament. As the name itself suggests, the law is designed to protect children, to protect minors from any kind of sexual offences. This is in line with India's commitments to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which was ratified by India in 1992. Now, before I discuss the provisions of POCSO Act, let me give you some important facts for prelims with regard to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. This convention was adopted by the UN General Assembly back in 1989. It came into force in 1990. It was open for ratification. Most countries ratified it, and it came into force as well. And India would ratify this convention in 1992. So since then, India had an obligation to bring in a law, an effective law to protect children from sexual offences and to implement some of the targets of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. See, this convention has brought out 54 articles that seeks to protect the well-being of the child. It mandates UN members to look after the well-being of children, to bring in legal measures to ensure that the physical safety of children is ensured, their nutritional safety is ensured, their emotional, mental safety is also ensured. It also looks at various other aspects of child growth and child development. It looks at education, healthcare, etc. Right? You can see the various targets that are mentioned over here. It focuses on protecting children from violence and discrimination. More importantly, it defines children, it defines the age limit until which an individual can be considered as a minor or as a child. It looks at family guidance and child development within the family, both physical and emotional development. It looks at educational opportunities for the child, healthcare opportunities, nutritional opportunities. So it takes into account all the aspects that are related to the well-being of a child, be it physical, emotional growth, educational access, healthcare, right? And also protection from all forms of crime, violence, and especially sexual violence. It even takes care of children from being employed in hazardous industries, right? Where child labor is widely used. So all these important areas are covered through the UN Convention, and India is also party to this convention. So in line with these commitments, India finally brought out the POCSO Act in 2012, and it contains a number of important provisions. And this is what is relevant for our exams. So let me take you through some of the important provisions while analyzing each of these points, which could help you write any mains answer for a question on the POCSO Act. It's a very expected topic, especially for your mains. See, under this Act, the government has clearly defined the age, the threshold age for treating an individual as a child. It is capped at 18 years. Previously, the previous practice before POCSO was those who are under 16 years would be considered as children. This was updated to 18 years, which is in line with global practices. Now, this creates a unique challenge. While it extends protection to all minors under the age of 18, it is a good provision, that is the positive side of it. There is a drawback as well. Because since the law is mainly dealing with protection of children from sexual offenses, now what if two minors have engaged in a consensual sexual act? Or what if a minor has engaged in a consensual sexual act with an adult? These cases are treated as rapes. It involves sexual abuse. It is treated as sexual abuse, and the law defines explicitly all forms of sexual harassment. It also deals with child pornography, penetrative and non-penetrative assault. So this is a positive point about the law. It provides for a clear definition of what constitutes sexual offenses. All forms of sexual harassment, all forms of sexual assaults are covered. This is good. But however, the age limit can create a problem. This was recently highlighted by the Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud. Just last month, D.Y. Chandrachud has called upon the Parliament and the government to try and amend POCSO Act to reduce the age limit back to 16 years. Because the judiciary is dealing with many cases where the minor child was involved in a consensual sexual act. In such cases, the final end result is the accused is let off. The accused is not held guilty because it would have involved a consensual act. But it is posing a huge challenge, a legal, moral and ethical challenge for judges, because it's very challenging to distinguish a consensual sexual act from a sexual offense or a sexual violent act that has happened. So that is why there is a criticism here that the age limit may not be appropriate, especially in the Indian context, especially incidents involving minors. And if there is a consensual sexual act involved, dealing with it as a sexual offense becomes very challenging for the legal machinery. So this is one of the drawbacks of the law, the shortcoming. Next, there is a very important point about POCSO Act. The Act is gender neutral. It does not distinguish between a male child and a female child. It gives both of them equal treatment. This is a positive aspect about the law. It is gender neutral and accounts for sexual offenses against the male child as well. According to data from NCRB, the National Crime Records Bureau, the number of cases under POCSO involving the male child victim is very less. It's hardly around 0.8%. The numbers might be low. The number of cases where the victims was a male child happens to be very low. But don't forget, many of the cases, majority of the cases involving children and sexual offenses, they go unreported in the country. Sexual offenses are faced, or sexual violence is faced not just by the female child, not just by minor girls, but also by the male child. So these offenses are largely ignored, they go unreported. So the provision which provides for gender neutrality in the law is a forward-looking provision, as it provides protection for the male child victims as well. So this is a very positive point about the law. Next, the other good feature about POCSO Act is that non-reporting of cases in itself is an offense. Let's say there are adults who are aware that a child is being abused, a child is being sexually, it's being exposed to sexual violence. If they don't report this to the police and file a case, even non-reporting can be an offense in itself. Even institutions are accountable. Let's say there is a school. The school knows that a particular teacher might be committing sexual offenses against children. If the school hides this, if it does not report this to the authorities, even the institution itself will be punished. Right? The officials of the institution will also be liable for punishment. So non-reporting in itself has been made an offense, and this is actually a positive point. There is general awareness today in the society, amongst individuals, amongst institutions, that you cannot be complacent when it comes to sexual offences against minors. It's been taken very seriously, and it has increased the number of cases which are being filed and reported. The other important positive point is that it covers child pornography as well. Any storage or circulation of child pornography has been made a separate offence. Globally, there is action being taken against child pornography because it is directly linked with human trafficking, prostitution, and abuse of minor children. So there is very strict action taken by governments against child pornography, and any act of circulating child pornographic content or storing it, this invites charges under the POCSO Act. So all these are positive points about the POCSO. However, there are certain challenges in its implementation. That is exactly what the author is trying to highlight. There are operational challenges and challenges in implementation. For example, the POCSO Act hasn't changed the manner in which these cases are investigated. Because on the ground, when cases are filed and when the police take up the investigation, the investigating officers, they are still following the outdated methods which are outlined under CRPC, under the Code of Criminal Procedure. Is that clear? The POCSO does not provide for any specific measures to sensitively deal with these cases, because the police have to be extremely sensitive while dealing with a minor victim of sexual abuse. They would have gone through a traumatic episode, so they have to be handled very delicately, very sensitively. So this is where the law has ignored this aspect of child welfare. It does not provide any specific provisions to protect children from very aggressive investigations, and the police follow the CRPC and the guidelines under the regular investigation procedure while investigating these cases as well. There are certain standards. For example, when a child is being interrogated, when the report is being generated, right, there should be a women police officer present. A women sub-inspector has to be present while recording statements from a child. This is part of POCSO Act and even part of the CRPC. Even while conducting forensic examination, while conducting the medical examination, while determining the age of the child, there are certain protocols that are laid down. But there should be a women officer present. But the problem is, in India, there is a critical shortage of women police officers. Our police force just hardly has around 10% of women. This is across India, across states. The number of women police officers are very low, and this impedes the right investigation, and it puts the victim under greater pressure. The Home Ministry had even tried launching a scheme called Investigation Unit on Crime Against Women. This was launched in 2015. The Home Ministry tried in every district to create a separate unit called IUCAW, where 1/3 of the force would be comprised of women police officers. They would be dedicated for looking into cases involving rapes against women and as well as against minor victims. But this could not be realized because states weren't very interested. This scheme would have involved 50% funds from the center, 50% funds from the states. But state governments did not show much interest, and as a result, this initiative did not really take off. So this is one of the shortcomings of the law. The other problem is with regard to the recording of the crime scene. The crime scene is absolutely vital in any case. So today you have modern technology available to capture the evidence of the crime scene. One of the basic tasks in any investigating procedure is to carry out audio video capturing of the crime scene. This is mandated by the Supreme Court as well in the Shafi Muhammad case. The Supreme Court has made it clear that the police have to ensure, the investigating officer has to ensure that the right technical tools are used to thoroughly capture the crime scene through audio visual methods. But at the ground level, this is not happening, especially in case of offences against children, sexual offences against children. Because at the police station level, they may not have the right equipment. They may not be storing the evidence properly. So such evidence which has been tampered, which has not been recorded properly, it will get dismissed in the court eventually when it reaches prosecution. So this has led to failure of many cases. The improper preservation and documentation of the crime scene has led to many cases getting squashed during prosecution because the evidence has not been collected properly, stored properly, or it has been tampered with. This is another flaw with the law. The law could have provided provisions to make it more effective. The next problem is with medical examination. it does not specify the sensitive methods to be adopted while conducting medical examination. So investigating officers are following the CRPC. When medical test is conducted during charges of rape and sexual offense, the medical officers are still relying on the banned method of the two-finger test. The two-finger test is banned by the Supreme Court. It is prohibited, it is orthodox, it is outdated, it has no place in a civilized democracy. Right? The virginity of the child has nothing, or the victim in general, has nothing to do with the offense which has happened. But this test, discriminatory traumatic test, is still conducted even in cases involving minors. And in general, the forensic labs in the country have very poor infrastructure. They're not able to pick up the right evidence, the medical evidence. So this is also leading to a lot of cases falling apart, and hence the conviction rate is very low. The other problem is with age determination. How exactly will you determine that the victim is a minor or not? How will you determine someone is under 18 years or not? If you try to do this only through documents, it may not be accurate and valid all the time. Right? That's what investigating officers are doing currently. Instead of determining the age through medical methods, which is more reliable, more accurate, investigating officers are going by records, especially date of birth records of the child. And I hope you know that across India, in many cases, the date of birth may not have been correctly recorded. So if the date of birth, the year itself is wrong, then it leads to a very, very serious problem with regard to enforcement of this law. It is possible that the defense might prove that the victim was not even a minor when the offense occurred. Or they might prove that the accused is also a minor. So it's very important to ensure that the age of the victim, especially, even that of the accused, is determined through medical methods. Right? But that is not being done. In many cases, investigating officers are relying on records which could easily be wrong or manipulated, and as a result, it is affecting the victims. It is not helping the minor victims, rather in a way it favors the defense. They misuse on this, they capitalize on this, and they try to seek an alibi for the accused. This is the other big challenge. Next is the period of investigation. See, under POCSO Act, in order to fast track the cases, to deliver quick justice, a 60-day deadline has been given, a 2-month deadline. So investigation has to be closed within 2 months and charge sheet has to be filed. So the intention is good to close the cases quickly. But what if the quality of the investigation is compromised? Because the investigating officer is under pressure. There is public pressure, there is media pressure, and more importantly, there is government pressure. Because in cases involving sexual offences against children, the Union Home Ministry will directly monitor those cases from the center. There is a project called CCTNS, the Crime and Criminal Tracking Network System, which provides for interlinking of state police and all police stations in the country. So through the CCTNS network, the Home Ministry is directly monitoring each and every case involving sexual offences against children. So investigating officers are scared. They're worried that if they don't close the case in 2 months, they'll be punished. The government will take action against them. So they'll be forced to make mistakes or try to close the case even without proper evidence. And in many cases, this has led to the derailment of justice itself. And also the problem is, in CRPC, if the police have not filed a charge sheet, even after 90 days after the accused has been arrested, the accused becomes eligible for bail. In this case, since the charge sheet is being filed within 60 days mandatorily, the accused becomes eligible for bail. As soon as charge sheet is filed, only till then the accused can be kept in custody, because to prevent the accused from tampering with the evidence. Now that charge sheet has been filed, all evidence has been collected according to the police, the accused can opt for bail and the judiciary will grant bail as well. So in a way it is helping the accused instead of helping the victim. So the period of investigation is putting unnecessary pressure, compromising the quality of investigation, and also helping the accused to get bail once the charge sheet is filed. So these are some major problems with POCSO Act, and as a result the conviction rate is very low. This is exactly what was pointed out by the Chief Justice of India. Due to all these shortcomings, the conviction rate has been low, and that is why there is a need for reforming this law. The law should be reviewed considering its implication. The law should be thoroughly reviewed and debated in the parliament. Opinion should be generated from all across the civil society, and there is a need to amend the POCSO Act. It has done well. There are many positive points as I discussed, but there are shortcomings as well. So that is what you need to conclude. And this is something you can directly take into your mains answers as well. Now let's move to the next article. It deals with the status of education in India, especially that of middle school. This topic is in news because the ASER report has been published recently. The ASER report, the Annual Status of Education Report. It's a widely respected report in India, which is brought out by a certain organization. Now I want you guys to take this as an exercise. Find out which institution publishes this important report, the ASER report. Find out the name and post that in the comments so that you can help the other aspirants who don't know this information. Take it as a small homework. So this report, the Annual Status of Education Report, helps in understanding the literacy levels, the education levels, the basic learning levels in the country and the status of education in India. Last 4 years, the report had not come out. The last report was in 2018. After that, for 4 years, there was a gap because of the pandemic. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, this institution was not able to bring out the report. So after 4 years, the 2022 report has been brought out and it provides for a detailed insight into the status of education in India. See, this report is generated through a house-to-house survey conducted all across the country, especially in rural areas. This institution conducts a survey of school-going children. It interacts with the parents, with the children and the schools as well, and collects important data to understand the level of learning in each state, in each district and across the country. The National Education Policy of 2020 has given very high priority for basic literacy, foundational literacy and numeracy skills, especially in primary schools, in the early grades. This is exactly what ASER report also focuses on. It gives more attention to primary schools, the extent of foundational learning, basic literacy and basic numeracy skills which our children are learning at the level of primary schools. It also focuses on middle and higher schools, but the primary focus is on the primary schools because the national education policy itself is focusing more on primary schools. So this is the focus of the government. The government has an initiative called Nipun Bharat, which stands for National Initiative for Proficiency in Reading with Understanding and Numeracy. So the government itself has prioritized that it should focus more on early education, primary education, where the focus is on ensuring basic reading skills are taught. A child can read a basic text, and focus is on basic numeracy, basic arithmetic skills, basic mathematical problems can be solved by school-going children. So since the government's education policy has that focus, even the report slightly focuses more on the primary schools. But however, the report also brings out data on middle schools and higher schools as well, secondary schools as well. Now this is where the article focuses on. Since government policy is entirely on primary schools, on early learning, foundational learning, the article here written by the author is focusing more on the problems at the middle school level. According to the report, there has been an increase in enrollment figures. In 2018, between 6 to 14 years of age, the school-going age, the primary school-going age, around 97.2% of our children who should be in schools were enrolled in schools. This number has jumped to 98.4% according to the latest data. This is a good point. It's a positive point. The enrollment has gone up. But however, there are many reasons which could have contributed to this. See, the pandemic led to the shutdown of many private schools, right? The parents also lost sources of income. The study has noted that even though the increase in the number of students enrolled is a positive point, they have noticed a very big trend where students have shifted from private schools to government schools. Is that clear? A clear trend has been noted. There is a shift happening from private schools towards government schools. First of all, the quality of education at government schools has been questioned, and at the same time, this could indicate a deeper problem. The problem is many private institutions have shut down because they incurred losses during the pandemic. They couldn't cope with introducing online education for their students. They lost their student base. Parents lost their jobs. They lost income source. They couldn't afford higher fees at private institutions. So this is a deeper problem that can be pointed out based on the findings of this report. But the good point is, definitely it has brought up more children into the schooling system. More children are getting educated. So this is good in the long run. As far as literacy levels, learning levels are concerned, it is good in the long run. But the other drawback is it could create problems. Since our middle school is not equipped, our secondary schools are not equipped to deal with the higher numbers, there could be a shortage of seats in higher education, in colleges, in universities, right? Few years down the line, there could be a shortage in the number of seats that are available, and it could increase competition amongst the children. It could lead to crippling competition, which already puts a lot of pressure on the students. It might even hamper job opportunities later if the problems at the higher levels of education is not addressed. The jump at lower level is good, but it is giving us some data about what the future might hold. It is possible that our secondary schooling system, our higher education system may not be able to handle the increased load coming in from primary schools. So will they have enough seats available? Will they have quality education available? Will they have enough jobs available finally when they graduate? These are some serious questions that come up, and this is where the government should also be focusing. The other important point I would like to bring up is that the report shows that our school children are not getting the right basic skills, especially in upper primary grades. They are not able to read a text. They are not able to solve a basic division problem. So on basic reading skills and arithmetic numeracy skills, our children in primary schools are falling behind. Their learning skills are behind the curve. This indicates a deeper rot in the education system, and that is a very, very worrying trend. The evidence clearly shows that basic learning levels have fallen. Children are not able to read a paragraph. They're not able to solve a basic mathematical problem. So if they transition from here to higher education or middle school, secondary schools, you can imagine the challenges they are going to face. They'll feel underconfident, they'll feel demotivated, right? It affects their mental state as well, because our education system is unfortunately an examination-driven examination system. It is an exam-driven model, and there is the parent obsession where they want their child to do exceptionally well in every board examination. The end goal has become topping the board exams. So this trend, this culture which has been imbibed, right? It has not changed even with the National Education Policy of 2022. The NEP was trying to make a change, trying to move away from this exam obsession, marks obsession, move towards learning skills. But on the ground, this is not reflecting. It is not happening on the ground because children in our primary schools are lacking basic literacy, foundational literacy and numeracy skills. The curriculum is also very, very ambitious. It is over ambitious. It is focusing on things which are not possible to implement at the ground level. Whereas the education system in general, teachers, then parents are still obsessed about exams, students doing well in the examination. So this problem has to be acknowledged. This is where the report can help. The report gives you these deep insights based on which the government, the civil society, and the education system, they have to acknowledge the learning loss which is happening. In the initial 5 to 6 years of schooling, there is a serious learning loss. There is a gap in learning. The basics are not being taught properly. So this has to be addressed, and there should be focus on promoting critical thinking amongst our students. Education is not just about rote learning. It's not just about memorizing facts. It should be about critical thought. It should be about developing one's opinions, right? So this is missing in the education system, and that's exactly what the government should also focus on. That is why these reports are very important. So please find out which institution brings out this important report and post that in the comment section below. Now let's move to the last article from international relations. It deals with India-Sri Lanka relations. It brings out the ongoing competition in Sri Lanka between India and China, the two major powers of the region. See, Sri Lanka is located in a strategic location of the Indian Ocean. It lies at the heart of the Indian Ocean. It forms an important connect between Africa and Europe on one side and Indo-Pacific on the other side. So Sri Lanka has many important port facilities like the Colombo port, which is a vital link in the global shipping network. So it has a lot of strategic and economic significance. India has been a traditional influence here. We share deep historical links with Sri Lanka. We have very close civilizational connections with Sri Lanka. Hinduism, Buddhism have been a common connect, right? Our epics also mention Sri Lanka. Many Indian kingdoms, empires, especially from South India, they've had a direct influence on Sri Lanka as well. We have had Indian Tamils settling in Sri Lanka during the colonial period. So there is a very rich history of cultural links between India and Sri Lanka. So India has been the dominant power naturally. Over the decades, India has been the dominant influence in Sri Lanka. But in the last 20 years, in the last 2 decades, China has emerged as a serious contender. China has stepped up its presence all across the Indo-Pacific, and particularly in Sri Lanka, it has gained a very strong influence, and today it is in a position to counter Indian influence. Especially since 2005. Since 2005, when Mahinda Rajapaksa was the president, China got closer to the Sri Lankan government by assisting Sri Lanka in eliminating the LTTE, the Tamil Militant Organization. Whereas India was not able to extend complete public support because of the sensitivities in Tamil Nadu, because of the sentiments that existed in Tamil Nadu towards the Tamil militant movement in Sri Lanka. Also, when Sri Lanka was criticized for human rights violations, when these allegations were brought up at the UN Human Rights Council, China was able to shield and protect the Sri Lankan government, whereas India was not able to take the same position. Again, India was under political pressure from Tamil Nadu, and India was forced to act against Sri Lanka. So China got closer to Sri Lanka during this period from 2005 to 2012. It immediately stepped up its economic investments, its military presence, and today it has become a dominant power in Sri Lanka. This map that I have shared here, it highlights the various strategic projects that India and Sri Lanka have executed together, and also compares this with the Chinese projects in the country. If you look at Indian investments, they are mainly concentrated in the northern and eastern parts of Sri Lanka, where you find the Tamil minorities. India has rebuilt the Palale civilian airport, the northern railway track, Kanke Senturai port. All these important infrastructure projects in northern Sri Lanka, they had been damaged and destroyed during the civil war and also during the 2004 tsunami. So India has rebuilt all this critical infrastructure near the Jaffna Peninsula. We have invested in the northern housing project, built around 50,000 houses for the Tamil minorities who were displaced by the conflict. Recently, we have won projects in eastern Sri Lanka to renovate the oil tank farms at the Trincomalee port, the strategic Trincomalee port. We have won a power project at Sampur to set up a coal power plant, and NTPC of India will be setting up the coal power plant. So all such important projects have been taken up by India. But China has been more influential by executing critical port projects such as the Colombo port project, Hambantota port, Matala airport, etc. The Colombo port is strategic port in the Indian Ocean. It's very vital for the global economy, and China has a very dominant influence over here. It has built the most important terminal at the Colombo port. India was supposed to execute another terminal project, but this project was taken away from India when Gotabaya Rajapaksa was the president, who was the brother of Mahinda Rajapaksa. Gotabaya Rajapaksa would also act in favor of China. He would cancel the project from India and Japan, who were supposed to build the East Container Terminal at Colombo port, and the same project was handed over to a Chinese company. Right? Hambantota port in southern Sri Lanka has been of greater concern because this strategic port, it has failed financially. The project is a financial failure, and it has pushed Sri Lanka into a debt burden, and it forced Sri Lanka to hand over the Hambantota port for a 99-year lease period. For a 99-year lease period to a Chinese company. So strategic experts in India and the Western countries, they believe that this is part of China's debt trap diplomacy. They believe that China is trapping small countries like Sri Lanka in a debt trap, putting them under debt burden. They won't be able to repay the loans eventually, forcing them to hand over these strategic projects to China for the long term. Right? This is true to an extent. Sri Lanka is indeed under a debt burden. As you know, it's going through a major financial crisis, and the crisis started because of its excessive borrowing. It borrowed excessively, not just from China, but from many other sources as well. The increased loan burden, the public debt burden, along with loss of key sectors due to the pandemic, due to the Russia-Ukraine war, put Sri Lanka's economy under a lot of stress. It reached a position where it couldn't repay the loans anymore. So China definitely has given out a lot of loans. There are outstanding loans of around $7 billion. But this accounts only for 20% of Sri Lanka's debt. The point that the writer is highlighting here is that many have a wrong perception that Sri Lanka's economic crisis is entirely created by China. That is not the case. China is not the only one responsible for the debt crisis, the economic crisis in Sri Lanka. Yes, the Chinese loans can be predatory. China might be pushing its debt trap diplomacy to take over strategic projects. But this alone is not responsible for the entire financial crisis of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has borrowed heavily not just from China, it has taken a lot of loans from India, Japan, and more importantly from global markets, from Western institutions. Just look at this graph that I've shared here. It gives you the breakup of Sri Lanka's foreign debt. China accounts for a little more than 10% of the loans. This has increased to around 20%. The overall debt burden, if you look at the overall debt burden of Sri Lanka, around 20% of it is coming from China. Japan is the second largest lender, accounting for another 10% of the loans. India comes third. And the World Bank and international markets, they account for most of the borrowings. The World Bank and the international markets. This is where Sri Lanka has borrowed heavily, and these markets are mainly controlled by Western institutions. Right? It has raised money through sovereign bonds and through various bond options, and this is mainly controlled by the Western companies, Western institutions. So it's wrong to assume that Sri Lanka's entire financial problem is because of China's debt trap diplomacy. This is where the article is cautioning India. Yes, there is a India-China competition, no doubt. India has given $4 billion in assistance. In the last 1 year itself, to help Sri Lanka overcome this crisis, we have given $4 billion in assistance. We have given fresh loans, we have postponed certain loan repayments, we have given fresh investments and aid as well. We have given essential supplies to Sri Lanka. So a total of $4 billion worth of assistance has been given by India. So this doesn't mean that India is putting Sri Lanka under a debt burden. So similarly, China might be capitalizing on strategic projects through its debt trap diplomacy, but doesn't mean that Sri Lanka's entire problems is because of Chinese loans. This acknowledgement is very, very important because one shouldn't over-exaggerate the Chinese presence, and this could lead to mistakes on India's part. If India were to over-amplify the Chinese investments and China's leverage on Sri Lanka, India might also overreact. To compensate for that, to counter China, India might also overreact, and this could compromise our ties with Sri Lanka. Right? So the right reading of the situation is very important. Yes, China has indeed, it has capitalized on the Hambantota port project, no doubt. It has stepped up its economic and military presence. It has brought nuclear submarine spy ships to Sri Lanka, which threatens our security. This is all a fact. But the economic crisis, the debt burden that Sri Lanka is under, it's not entirely because of Chinese loans. It constitutes a significant part of it, but that's not everything. Right? There is Japan, there is India, there are global financial institutions, Western institutions from where Sri Lanka has borrowed. So this is where accountability has to be fixed. The Sri Lankan public have to ask the right questions. In the last 15 years, there has been unnecessary expenditure in Sri Lanka. Revenue has fallen, but expenditure has gone up. Wasteful expenditure has happened. Government corruption has been high. This is where Sri Lankans have to wake up as well and hold their leaders accountable. India also should acknowledge the situation and not see everything from the perspective of India-China competition. Right? So this is the caution the editorial is striking, and that is what we need to draw or infer from this important column. So on this note, I would like to bring my discussion to an end. Please take up the mains questions, the practice questions I have given over here. Right? These are on the first two topics we discussed. Try and write an answer to the question, post it in the answer writing portal, which has been provided in the description box below. So that is it from my side. I hope it was a good session. Do let us know how it went by pressing the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.